join us. Very welcome to our SMEDIAs workshop. I think we've got most of our people who are waiting in the waiting room, and we'll have some more joining as we go along. Just a reminder, if you'd like to pop speaker view on there up the top right hand corner, you won't have to see your faces from the beginning, but we will have a good bit of Q&A and discussion later on. So please do feel free to leave your cameras on for a chat later on and to ask your questions to the journalists directly. But of course, if you're not comfortable doing that, or you're on campus, whatever else, you can feel free to send in questions in the chat too. We are recording this first half of the session, so if you prefer not to be on camera, that's absolutely fine. Please do turn your cameras off for this segment. We'll just be recording the inputs from the speakers, and then we'll go off recording so that you can have frank discussion with the journalists and ask your questions, and indeed all of the speakers. If you'd like to have your participant pack up beside you, or if you have a copy, just to run through it super quickly, and the format for the day, the schedule, we'll be hearing from just a few welcomes from ourselves and our colleagues in the European Commission representation in Ireland firstly. Then we'll hear from journalists Aoife Moore, who's with the Irish Examiner, and Jude with the Financial Times, and they'll be sharing all of their insights into writing about the EU and their careers as journalists. Lots of tips for you young aspiring journalists. We'll then hear from Alana, Daly, Mulligan, who was last year's winner of the Commission Award in the SMEDIAs, and they'll be sharing lots of tips and tricks and ideas for submitting an entry. We'll take a super quick coffee break, toilet break then, if anyone needs to step away. And after that, we'll hear from Grace Bolton, who's head of press and media at the European Commission representation. And Grace will be sharing lots of information with you about the European Union institutions, processes, and that side of things for anyone who maybe is coming from a media journalism background and hasn't had a lot of insights into European affairs and that type of thing. I appreciate lots of you are coming from different backgrounds. We have some students from the sort of European studies side of things, some from journalism media. There'll be something for everybody, and we hope that there will be insights for all of you and tips and new things to learn for all of you too. We'll also then have a chat, as I say, have some Q&A, so lots of times for questions there, but do feel free to pop a question in the chat at any point. And we'll do a couple of Zoom polls to get your thoughts on the media today, on the EU and things like that, and start a bit of a discussion. So then we'll be wrapping up before 2 o'clock. But of course, if there's anything we miss, if we're pressed for time at the end, do stay in touch with myself and Elizabeth. Send us in your questions. Let us know if there's anything we've missed or anything that comes to you afterwards. And we really hope that you'll all be super encouraged to apply to the SMEDIAs awards later than after the workshop when you've gotten all of the information. So also in your participant pack, you will see bios for all of the speakers and ways to connect with them online and things like that. So have a look at that afterwards if you would like to do anything like that too. And guidelines for applying for this year's European Commission SMEDIAs award. It's really important that you read through those guidelines and be really clear on how to apply and what should be included in your entry, and indeed the topics. There are set topics around the European Commission Awards, so just to be sure you're sticking to those too. And you'll also see a list of links that should be helpful to you in putting together your submission. So just to say a few quick hellos, I'm firstly going to pass to Grace, who I mentioned is head of press and media. She's going to speak to you just in place of Barbara Nolan, who sadly couldn't be with us today and sends her apologies. Barbara is the head of the European Commission representation in Ireland and would have loved to join us today, but unfortunately couldn't. So Grace, I know you wanted to say a quick welcome first. Grace, I'm not sure if you're on mute there.
There we go. First of all, a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us for this workshop. The European Commission representation in Ireland has been funding the SMEDIA European Award Prize and this workshop as well for a number of years now, because we're very keen to encourage students like yourselves to develop an interest and a critical understanding of European topics. For us, the most important thing is that you engage. It can be positive, it can be negative, it can be constructive, whatever you like, but we really want to be talking with you and we really want to be discovering what you think about the different policies and ideas that the Commission is pursuing at the moment. Very briefly, I would say a big thank you to our two journalists, Aoife Moore and Jude Webber, who are giving up their time completely voluntarily to share insights with you about what it's like to become journalists and what it's like to work as journalists in this day and age. I'm sure there'll be lots of advice and insights on the challenges and opportunities with some more digital space we're all working in now. And a big congratulations to Alana Daly Mulligan, who won the prize last year, who can also share with you some views about how best to prepare your submission and what sort of things you might want to think about when you're preparing your submission. So without much more ado from me, I am going to pass on to our next speaker. So thank you for being here.
Thanks a million, Grace, and thanks again to the European Commission representation. We are always delighted to work on this workshop with the Commission, who, as Grace mentioned, has funded us to do that in the last few years. And it's always great to see all of you joining in and interested in applying for the SMEDIAs, and we hope that you'll all be encouraged to do so after this. So just to tell you a bit about our organisation, European Movement Ireland, my CEO of our organisation is here too to just say a very quick hello. Noelle, I might welcome you now to speak.
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. Well, hang on, 12:09. No, good afternoon. Apologies. I'm still not up to speed with the time change, with the clock change. It's lovely to see so many of you here with us today, and a big thank you to Barbara, to Grace, and their colleagues in the European Commission. And of course, our own team, to Lisa and Elizabeth here in European Movement Ireland. And to you, the SMEDIAs is always one of the highlights of our work programme, and our organisation was founded in 1954 to work on communicating Ireland and Europe. So what you guys are going to learn about and hear about today from three fantastic journalists and previous winner in Alana, you're getting some fantastic top tips. So it really ties in with what our organisation is about and what we have done for the last 60 years here in Ireland. And I suppose it's especially timely that people are writing or talking about our relationship with Europe and Ireland's role and our place in it, particularly as we look forward to the referendum next year, the anniversary, 50 years of when that referendum took place, and then in 2023, 50 years marking Ireland formally joining the European Economic Community, what it was then. How has our relationship evolved over the years, and what do we want to shape and influence it over the years to come? I've just come back from Strasbourg for the first plenary session of the Conference on the Future of Europe. So that was my very interesting bank holiday weekend in Strasbourg last week. But it was fascinating to see everyone from across the EU discussing and debating the European Union, and how important it is that people communicate frankly and honestly, and how important it is that our values are maintained and upheld, because these are very challenging times. There's a lot of threats and challenges to the very foundation and the very values of our European Union. And that's why the work that you are going to hear about today, and I'd really encourage you to get involved and to enter into the competition. It's so important, because we do need to speak truth to power and to promote transparency, accountability and engagement, and that's what you guys are all going to do. And if I may as well, just a big thank you to our journalists. These are not easy times for the media, but arguably their role has never been more important. And I really saw that particularly in Strasbourg. Lots of challenges to the maintaining of our values, of promoting equality. And that's why I think you all have such an important role to play. So I wish you continued success. I wish you the very best of luck in entering the SMEDIAs, and a big thank you to our journalists, to the European Commission for making all of this possible, and to my own colleagues in European Movement Ireland. And I hope you really get a lot out of the workshop today. Thanks a million. Lisa, back to you.
Thanks, Noelle. And the last intro that we have is from Ciara Mahan, who is Services Director with Generation Y, which works on the SMEDIAs. Ciara, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Lisa. So I'm just going to give you a little background on the National Student Media Awards. They have been going for 22 years. This will be our 22nd year. The SMEDIAs, as they are known, celebrate all things student media. So we have about 20 journalist categories, including obviously journalism relating to EU affairs, but there's current news and current affairs, arts and pop culture. There's lots of different categories there. Radio, animation, TV, podcast. There's something there for every student who's interested in getting involved in media. the reason the SMEDIAs have so much weight behind them is because of the caliber of judges. So many great journalists and people within the media industry give their time to judge the categories. So we've had the editors of the newspaper, Fionn and Sheehan, we have the guys get some great budget judges here as well. So it's a fantastic opportunity for students to get their work seen and viewed by the top people in their industry. There's lots of other benefits for students. You know, it's a fantastic networking event. You meet some great people. You're competing with other students from around the country. And we get so many entries. You know, there's 30 different colleges that get involved, and there's over 1,000 entries. So to be even nominated looks amazing on your CV. It's so good. Anyone within the industry is very familiar with the SMEDIAs. So to be involved and to get nominated or to go on and win is just such an achievement. It's a fantastic way to get into the media world. Anybody who has been involved in media in the last 20 years has at some stage been involved, whether it was as a shortlister, as a judge, as a presenter on the night. So we have done it online over the last 2 years, but we are hoping to be in person in the Aviva next April. That is the plan. But it was run very successfully on YouTube, and we had a great number of entries, and we had a lot of judges and presenters come in. Samantha Library she is a great example. She is one of our judges. She's an RTE presenter, and she won 5 National Student Media Awards when she was in college. So it's great to see them, the people, like a lot of the judges that come back remember their time in college and getting involved in the ideas. How it works, where you get all your information, I suppose, is oxygen.ie. So that is our student portal. If you go on there, there will be a SMEDIAs 2022 section updated in the next while. All information on the categories, the segments, there'll be updates from our sponsors, which obviously European Commission are great to get involved. But also the Irish Independent, the Irish Times, the Irish Examiner, RTE, all involved in it as well. So it's an opportunity to get them to see your work. Oxygen.ie will have all of the categories. We'll put updates on, there's also SMEDIA's Facebook and Instagram. If you would like to follow them, we will be putting updates throughout the year. Provisional dates at the moment are 21st of April for the actual event, and the closing date for entries is the 16th of March. But I will confirm that if you guys wouldn't mind sharing your email, allowing us to so that we can give you updates directly, we can send on once that's finally confirmed. I think that's what we're going with, but I will make it official on the website soon, and we can also send you out email updates on everything going on, updates, new categories. As I said, I think we had 40 categories last year, so it's fantastic. There's something there, as well as the journalism relating to EU affairs. Yeah, that's really it. Go to oxygen.ie, check out the SMEDIAs pages. It's a fantastic event to be involved in. The night itself, if you get nominated and come along on the night, it's great fun. There's lots of people from the media industry. It's a great celebration of all the students' hard work. And we'd love to see your guys' entries coming in, and see you on the night as well. Hopefully that it will be a real life event this year. Thanks very much.
Thanks a million, Ciara. I know it was a disappointment not to be able to bring everyone together, because I've heard it is a wonderful night. And as you say, it's such a great way for aspiring journalists, I think, to connect to journalists out there. As you say, everyone's been involved over the years. So thanks a million for those insights. I'll keep this very brief, folks. Just a couple of overview bits to add on to what I spoke about before. Elizabeth, if you might pop up my slide there, and then we will jump over to Aoife. Aoife will have to leave us a bit earlier, folks. So if you have any questions for Aoife, do get them into us soon enough on the chat, or indeed you can raise your hand or go off mute there, and we can come around to you for some questions. And then we will have much more chance for discussion and questions later on. So as I say, you're all very welcome to our workshop today. And as I say, the overview today, we're hearing from the journalists, and we're going to come back to you all for some discussion and chat then later on. Elizabeth, you can click on there. I think the third slide is fine. Yeah, and as you see there, as Grace mentioned as well, we're delighted to be joined by a couple of wonderful speakers today. Aoife Moore, who I'll introduce very shortly, Jude Webber, who's with the Financial Times and joining us slightly later today, and Alana Daly Mulligan, who was last year's winner of this European Commission SMEDIAs Award, and Grace Bolton, who you heard from earlier from the European Commission representation. And finally, as Ciara mentioned, go on to the last slide there, Elizabeth. These are our, sorry, the one just before that. These are some of those contact details and social media handles that Ciara mentioned, and we'll send all of these slides on to you afterwards. So don't worry about taking notes or anything today. Lots of great accounts there to follow at the SMEDIAs at oxygen_IE, as Ciara said, to be sure that you keep up to speed with the dates and any changes to the competitions. And so the final slide then, Elizabeth, is fine. And as I say, this is the 22nd year of the SMEDIAs, and it's such a great opportunity today, and just being part of the process, applying to learn more about journalism and media, and to really get your name out there. As Ciara mentioned, journalists that we know and love today were previous recipients when they were in college. So this could be you, and we really want to encourage you all to apply and not to be scared away from applying. Sometimes I think people think I couldn't win that. It's always worth applying, and I'm sure Alana will be encouraging to you all about that later too. And you can find out more about that particular award on oxygen.ie and all of the SMEDIAs awards. And as Ciara mentioned, we would love to hear from you, and we would love to stay in touch with you. Ciara and everyone at SMEDIAs will keep you posted on all of the updates and the changes, and you know, all of the information about the competition. So just let us know if you'd like to be added to that mailing list. You can email us. You can email SMEDIAs directly, or you can email Elizabeth, who is in touch with you. And we'll be sending you out some feedback forms. So there'll also be a spot there for you to ask for more information about the SMEDIAs. So that's great, Elizabeth, thanks a million. I'm delighted now, without any further ado, to pass over to our first speaker, who is Aoife Moore. You can all read her full bio in your participant pack, but I'm sure lots of you know of her from her wonderful work on Twitter, and of course her work with the Irish Examiner. She's the political correspondent for the Irish Examiner, and she's known for her extensive journalism on lots of key issues for Ireland and indeed for Europe, particularly on Brexit. And the reason we invited her here today to speak about European affairs and writing about European affairs. So Aoife, I might pass the floor over to you, and thanks so much. And folks, just remember, Aoife will have to leave us a little bit earlier. So if you have any questions for Aoife, be sure to get them in soon enough. And we'll have a quick Q&A with Aoife before she heads off after her presentation. Thanks, Aoife.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, hi everyone. I don't have any slides. I'm just going to talk off the cuff. For those people who don't know me, my name is Aoife Moore. I am a political correspondent with the Irish Examiner, like Lisa just said. I've been at the Irish Examiner. I started on Valentine's Day, just before COVID came and closed everything down last year. So I've been there just under 2 years. I think my background and where I come from is probably the reason that I am a journalist, and also the reason why I took such a strong interest in Brexit and European affairs when it came. I am originally born and reared in Daly City. I'm the first person in my family to have gone to university, so I don't fit into the kind of typical journalism mold in Dublin, and I think that's really important, but I'll come to that in a while. I grew up in Derry, and I came from not necessarily a political family, but a campaigning family. My mommy's brother, Patrick, was murdered on Bloody Sunday by the British Army, and we were one of the founding families of the Bloody Sunday Justice Campaign. And I was always at marches and press conferences and the inquiry and different things. As a child, it was just part of my life. I didn't know any different. And in Derry, I wasn't even the only person in my class at school who was a Bloody Sunday family, so it was incredibly normal. My dad is really into the news. There's always newspapers at home. We had to watch the news every night, and I'm what's called a ceasefire baby. So the Good Friday Agreement came around when I was in primary 2 or primary 3, around 7. So the news was always on all the time. I remember a lot less so than my parents, but I do remember the British Army on the streets and the RUC. So I have a vague memory of life before Good Friday and after Good Friday. But I would say, and I have said before, I am exactly what the Good Friday Agreement was for. I was born into a conflict zone. I got a good education. I went to university, and now I try my hardest to actively represent the place I come from well. And throughout school, I was always good at English, had a big interest in politics because most people in Derry have a big interest in politics. And when I was around 16, I decided that I was going to be a journalist, mostly because I didn't want to be a solicitor. And the school that I went to were determined to make everyone solicitors, and I didn't want to do that. And I went to Glasgow Caledonian University, and a lot of people at the time tried to convince me to do English and politics and then do a master's. That was not an option that was open to me for 2 reasons, mostly because I really didn't enjoy school, and I really actually knew I had to go to university, but I wasn't really looking forward to it. So the thought of doing an extra year wasn't something I was willing to do, and also I couldn't afford it. And I did multimedia journalism at Glasgow Caledonian University for 4 years. I am probably a bad example when it comes to what you should be doing in student journalism, as I started university at the start of the financial crash, which meant that my parents were not able to help me with any money, and I had at least 2 part-time jobs the whole time I was at university. So the option of student journalism and extracurricular stuff wasn't really open to me. I did bits and pieces. I did it where I could. There was a few student publications I worked for off and on. In the summer, when I had the chance, I would go do the Derry Journal and the Derry News and do all the bits and pieces that I could do when I could do it. But it did mean that when I left university, when I graduated, I was on a back foot compared to some of the people I was at university with who were able to do student journalism. So I think in one way it made me work a lot harder. I had to become a lot more determined, a lot quicker upon leaving university. I always knew I wanted to work in some kind of politics or conflict or foreign affairs journalism. Wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And in 4th year, when I was almost graduating, I applied for a place through a human rights charity to become a press officer for a human trafficking charity in Malawi in Southeast Africa. So I moved there. I didn't bother going to my own graduation ceremony. I went to Malawi instead and lived there for around 5 or 6 months without running water or steady electricity. Still one of the best things I've ever done. You do not need to wash your hair as much as you think you do, just as an aside, as some advice. Came back and I immediately hit the ground running. I have applied for every job and any job that I could get my hands on. I have had some of the most unglamorous jobs in journalism. I moved back to Scotland after Africa. I stayed in Glasgow. I got a job at a press agency, a small press agency, and began my career there. A lot of court reporting, a lot of crime scenes, a lot of what we would call door knocks, where you will attend someone's door whose family member has just been murdered. They have been through some kind of personal tragedy. It is an incredibly awkward and difficult part of the job. It's usually given to young reporters because nobody else wants to do it. You do that, you cut your teeth, and then I eventually ended up at a local regional paper where you write all the stories about bus stops and bus bays and park benches and all those stories. And although you think you're not doing much, and I used to sit at my desk sometimes and think I'm in 22 grand worth of debt and I'm writing stories about bins for dog litter, but it is all worth it. It's all part of the job. And I just worked my way through. I took anything and everything, and just each job I just got a wee bit better and a wee bit more money and just moved along. I eventually came back to Dublin, came back to Ireland with Press Association, who are the biggest press agency in the UK and Ireland. Their customers include everyone from the BBC to the Daily Mirror to CNN. And when I got there, the Brexit negotiations were beginning to kick off. I had been actually living in Australia during the actual Brexit referendum. I watched it incredibly closely. I, as a Northerner, as someone who lives on the border, could not believe some of the stuff I was hearing, the rhetoric I was hearing, especially from the DUP, especially from even places like people like Arlene Foster, whose constituency was, mostly farmers who relied on the EU. I find the whole thing totally bizarre, and took it quite personally. As somebody who lives on the border, my dad's a barman. His pub was in Donegal, but we lived in Derry. The border has always been this big, you don't even think about it because you cross it so many times a day. And when I started at PA, it became working as a professional journalist for an English company. It became incredibly clear to me while covering Brexit that the main issue, and the main issue that still I think is, no one really understands Northern Ireland and its people do not really get a seat at the table when it comes to Brexit negotiations. That bugs me no end. The reason I became a journalist is because I was quite critical of the media as a teenager. I saw how the Bloody Sunday families were treated. I saw how things were reported about Northern Ireland that weren't accurate or left out context, and that always really bugged me. And the reason I went into journalism was because I thought, well, you can't just complain about something if you think you can do it better. I remember watching even a BBC report years ago when I was around 9 or 10, and it was, during the Good Friday Agreement or just after, when it was still incredibly, the violence had subsided, but it was still incredibly tense. And a BBC reporter had been in a little town outside of Derry called Strabane in County Tyrone, and the BBC reporter couldn't pronounce the name Strabane properly. And I remember thinking that this is, the state broadcaster, and they've come here to report on the politics of this place, and they couldn't even pronounce the name because they obviously hadn't said the name out loud to anyone in the town. And I find that I'm thinking about that a lot during the Brexit negotiations. I went to Brussels. PA sent me to Brussels. Actually, I went to Brussels twice. Once with Theresa May, once with Boris Johnson. And even in Brussels, and the Commission is this huge, daunting kind of place. The press room is like, most press rooms are about the size of 2 cupboards stuck together. The press room and the Commission is this huge big hall, and there's like 50 tables, and you walk in and there's like Laura Kusenberg from the BBC and people that I would see as nearly celebrities because they're so famous in what they do. And I get sent there as, in my mid-20s working for PA, like sweating, carrying this camera that I don't know how to use. But I think what I always felt that Irish journalists always had was at least an in-depth knowledge of how important and consequential Brexit would be. Just by chance, I ended up being the only journalist to interview Theresa May when she came to the border. She visited Bulleek with Arlene Foster. Actually, I've now since worked out, I think I gave her the gold, but that's a story for a different day. But I was so intimidated. I was, 26, 27, interviewing the Prime Minister of the UK about a subject which was incredibly complicated. These huge diplomatic negotiations going on, and I was sat in this little back staff room in Bulleek with the Prime Minister of the UK, and I remember thinking, I don't think she gets this. I would say that Boris Johnson gets it even less. And I have found that's why journalism is so important, is that if you need people who understand the topic to report on the topic. I have found even in my own work in the Examiner, if I am asked to go on the radio to talk about something, if it's not something I feel I know enough about, I will not do it. I have been asked to go on local radio stations and talk, because I'm a political correspondent, I'll be asked sometimes to go on and talk about, the cap payment for farmers or, agricultural issues. And I'll say, I'm sorry, I don't think I'm the person to do that. I think journalism and our media will only get better when people are willing to say that they don't know enough about something. I think a lot of that became very clear in Brexit, the Brexit negotiations, and that's not just in the media. I mean, we've seen, the viral videos of British politicians trying to talk about the North and the border with any type of, knowledge. And I think it was Matt Hancock said that he hadn't got round to read reading the Good Friday Agreement, which is 18 pages. So I think that's, for me, I had never really thought about Europe in any other way as that Europe, the dairy person and the northern person was the people who gave us all the funding. The age group I am in, I was taken to a number of cross-community events. We had these different groups that would take teenagers away. Very much like in Dairy Girls, when you have to go and meet all the Protestants. I have done that. It is as ridiculous and hilarious as you think it would be. I remember at one point someone asked someone, did Protestants eat vegetables? So these are the types of events that the EU are funding. So I never particularly felt European in the way. I never thought about it. But Brexit really brought it all home that Northern Ireland had been left on their own again. And the Good Friday Agreement was all that was really keeping us together. And it was quite clear from early on that Europe's dedication and the Republic of Ireland's dedication to the Good Friday Agreement was steadfast. But it appeared very quickly that the British government did not understand the Good Friday Agreement or didn't want to, in my opinion. So yeah, I never considered myself that I would go into something like European affairs or this would be something I would specialise in, but I do think you fall into these things by accident. I think my background, my relationship to the politics of where I'm from and my living on the border is probably a big part of it. And then moving to Dublin, I have also found that a lot of people in the Republic don't understand the North. I think a lot of the time the political discourse can reduce Northern Irish people to these caricatures, of the Bible bashing DUP voter and then the IRA supporting nationalist voter, and that's just, or Sinn Féin voter, and that's absolutely not, like, there is so much other context that I think is removed. So I have spent a lot of time in the work that I do at the Examiner trying to add context to the politics. I did a huge piece last Christmas about the shared island unit that the Taoiseach was starting, trying to explain the different communities in Northern Ireland and their views on a united Ireland in Europe and everything else. So I think I know that my voice is quite different when it comes to these issues. There are only a few Northern poll corps in Leinster House. I think there's maybe only 3 of us. So the burden kind of falls on us to do a lot of the explaining, because obviously it's our lived experience as well. But it's something I'm quite proud to do, and I think there could be a lot more. I think when people elect their MEPs, they go away to be MEPs, and you don't really think about your MEP. Again, you don't really think about the votes that are taken in Europe. I think that's something that has to change immediately. People complain about the bureaucracy and everything else about Europe, but there isn't enough focus in the media or elsewhere in public consumption of what happens there. And I think that's something that we should change going forward, because Europe is so important to our future. I think we have found during Brexit how important the European Union is to Ireland and Northern Ireland. So that's something I would like to see. I've talked for like quite a good while now, so I'm happy to take any questions, but I hope I covered enough anyway. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks a million, Aoife, and I'll keep an eye out if anyone would like to raise their hand and ask Aoife a question directly, or you can pop a question in the chat. Aoife, I suppose I wonder, having won so many awards in journalism yourself, how do people stand out in a competition like this that's so competitive? Would you have any tips for how to make your writing really stand out for future careers in journalism, for this award, for this specific award, and on the European Commission, and for the SMEDIAs, if you have any experience in that regard?
Yeah, I think like the best stories are something that you're interested in. When I worked at Press Association, I got sent to absolutely anything and everything. I would run from the criminal courts of justice over to Leinster House to do a press conference, and then that evening be sent out on a boat to do a story about this new boat. So I would say that with me, I always found that my writing was so much better when I was interested in the subject. And if the topic is assigned to you and it's not necessarily something you would find interesting, find an angle on it that you would find interesting. Something's a story. The way to work out whether something is a news story or not is to think, well, would I want to read this? I think that's the most important thing. Do not write a story about a topic because you think that's the topic that people are going to care about, that's going to win you the award. I think something that you can talk confidently about, that you have a great knowledge of, and the reason that you get a great knowledge of these things is because you find them interesting. I mean, I could talk for days about the stardust and for example, it's something I find incredibly interesting. I know everything about it, and because I find it interesting in my work, and you can even see it in the work that I have been nominated for. I mean, you know, the stuff about Lyra McKee and the stuff about John Hume, like that stuff about dairy. So it's obvious that my work is going to be better because it's a topic I know really well. So even if it's something that you have been assigned, a topic you've assigned, I would advise finding a new angle or a new way of looking at it that makes it more interesting to you, because your work and your writing will be better because of it.
Yeah, and I remember last year's previous recipient of this award as well advised that it shouldn't, as you say, to be prescribed and you know, thinking this is what the journalists will want or the judges will want. It should be something that you're passionate about yourself, that makes sense to you. I remember she wrote about her Erasmus year, and so she felt, oh, this doesn't have a chance of winning, but she won. So it really depends on the year and, you know, the other applications and that passion, I think, about what you're writing about. Yeah, absolutely. Do we have any other questions there? Anyone would like to ask me a question before she's to hop off very shortly?
I'm happy to jump in. I have a quick question. So firstly, Aoife, thank you so much. I've seen you speak before and you're just always amazing to talk. Like, not to fangirl, but your class. I suppose just a general question about kind of the attitude down in the Republic to the Northern Irish issue. So I know, like, a lot of people in the Republic of Ireland, there is an attitude of, oh, well, I'm not qualified to talk on this issue, so I'm just going to kind of ignore it. What do you think we need to do as journalists to make people feel like they can respond to this argument and be a bit more educated?
Yeah, I find actually even that it's not, there are two types of people. So there are people say, I don't know enough about it, so I'm not going to talk about it. There are also the people who don't know enough about it but can't shut up about it. So I think, I mean, if anyone follows me on Twitter, it is not a secret that I get an incredibly hard time from a lot of people in the Republic. And a lot of it is based around the fact that I am Northern. They feel incredibly threatened. That's the only conclusion I can come to, is that they feel incredibly threatened that I have the gall to come down and explain that Northern Irish and North issues matter, and that everything happens in a context. I think I would say the only silver lining in this is, the thing I have found the most is that in younger generations, people my age and younger do not have the same kind of biases that their parents might have had. They are a lot more curious. They want to learn about the North. They haven't written the North off, which I think a lot of people in the Republic have. I think, you know, you need to remember that these are people who might have grown up seeing, you know, the hunger strike on RTE and, you know, the Enniskillen bomb and the Oma bomb and Rotten King's Mills and all those things. And it creates kind of base knowledge in the back of their head of what they think the North is. Younger generations don't have that. They're more willing to learn. They have an open mind, be accepting. I think, although I would hope now, like, schools are now trying to at least educate young people about what happened in the North and the reasons we have all the problems that we have. But I think in the media as well, and we are starting to see, you know, like the Irish Times now has a Northern Ireland editor. There's now a Northern Irish version of the Sunday Independent. I think people can see the writing on the wall that the North and the South are going to be a lot more, and I'm not saying United Ireland, but a more unified. You know, there is a lot more North and South communication and cooperation, and that's because of Brexit. Brexit has forced this, because it made everybody make a decision about what they actually wanted in the future. And I think we are starting to see small changes in the media, but I do think more concentration could be given to the issues in Northern Ireland. You know, we've, like, for instance, my friend Freya McClement, she works at Irish Times, she's their deputy Northern editor. She did this huge piece about a gold mine, a potential gold mine in Tyrone. She said she got great reception. People absolutely loved it. It was one of the top stories in the Irish Times. There is an appetite there. It's not that the people in the Republic see Tyrone and say, well, this doesn't matter to me. There is an appetite there. I just think editors and producers have to be a bit more confident in putting those northern issues out there, because I have found when you're writing about Brexit, it is hard to get people interested in Brexit. It's very dry. There's a lot of bureaucracy. I totally get that. But if you can put the more human angle on it, if you can say and bring it back to people's front doors, whether it's like, you're now going to have to pay package charges on clothes from Topshop, people are going to click on that story. So you need to remember that even though the subject matter can be really dry, I always think politics at the end of the day is about people. And if you can get the people angle of it and the more interesting angle of it, I think people will respond better. And I think the same way about issues in the north is that people do care. There is an interest there. They haven't all written these off, but it's just, it needs to be a bit more forthcoming when it comes to the media.
Thanks, Aoife, and thanks, Alana. And that's Alana who will be speaking next. We've one more quick question there, Aoife, if you have a second to stay on.
No worries.
Mairead, would you like to unmute yourself there and ask?
Aoife, you talked like a lot about like your background, how that kind of like has impacted what you're interested in, and like kind of the things that I suppose maybe you pursue more, and like that's obviously really important and stuff. But are there times where you feel like, you know, because I suppose like people want the media to be like unbiased and all this, which I don't know, I don't think that's possible, but like, you know, we all have our own like political views and things, and you know, you could try and write the most like unbiased article, but at the end of the day you're still writing that article on that thing or whatever it is. And I suppose like, is that kind of like a bit of a, like, is that something you think about a lot, like or I don't know if that's kind of like a, like something you've had to kind of come to terms with like over time in your career about like
I would say especially when I was working at Press Association, Press Association runs the same editorial policy as the BBC and RTE, so they do not do opinion pieces, they do not do columns. It is straight down the line reporting. At Press Association you're not allowed to use adjectives, so you're never going to read like a brutal murder, you know, like those adjectives are not included. It's just the facts straight down the line. That's the way I was. I've worked in tabloid journalism and I worked at Press Association, and I had never written opinion pieces before, and I find it quite strange because the way obviously journalism works is the upside down triangle. So you're trying to get the most important information at the start, and then this person said this person said that, here is what, and then depending on what the story is about, whether it's COVID or the science or whatever else, you try and give another expert view on it, and that's how it works. And it is tough, you know. I did a lot of reporting on and still do reporting on the abortion issue in the north, especially, you know, when I have interviewed Sarah Ewart, for instance, who is a representative now, quite what's the word? She didn't plan on it, but that way quite unexpectedly, but had to travel to England for a fetal abnormality, and you can't help be taken in by these people's personal stories, and you can see yourself in those people. And then you have to go and talk to you know, anti-choice groups who would disagree, or like you interview the DUP or different politicians, and you need to understand that this is also everybody is especially elected officials, they're elected by the people. This is democracy, this is how this works, they're allowed to have their opinion. I think your own biases are fine when it comes to, say, like a column, if you're asked to write an opinion piece. But I think the thing I always try and remember is that when I'm doing a story, no matter what it's on, even if I think the person's wrong, it's not really about me. You know, you're only there to report the facts. I was asked recently by a Dutch researcher if I believed in this notion that journalists in conflict areas should do stories that promote peace, which seemed, I know it's a nice thought, but seemed wrong to me, because although you're not actively trying to make anything worse, it's not a journalist's job to try and pursue one end or another. I think you're there to report the facts and the facts only, and that's what I always try and remember. And like, of course it is hard, especially, you know, if you have to interview someone who doesn't believe that a certain group should have rights, or, you know, and believe completely different things to you. But the thing I always remember is like, it's not really about you. And I think especially in politics, I like to think I give everyone quite a hard time. Because especially in like opinion pieces and columns, I try and give everyone an equal shake at it, and that's the way I do the job. But when it comes to the actual reporting and the day-to-day reporting of the Dáil or the North or whatever, you know, you need to remember that all these people are equal, especially in politics, that they have been elected to be there, and their opinions deserve to be reported, unless they're literally, you know, calling for crime or whatever, or anything like that. But yeah, it is tough, but you also do grow quite a resilience when you're reporting. For, I think when I was maybe like 15, 16, and I was like, thought I knew everything and a bit of a mouth, I would have argued with people, but that's just not the job now. You know, you go in and do the job, you state the facts, and you go again. But you do get better at it. I used to come away from jobs, you know, you might have been like meeting people who were in the far right. I did some of that work in Scotland, and it's quite hard not to argue back with people, of course, but you can just ask the questions and then argue maybe the point, but not actually get into an argument. But you do get better at it, and you wouldn't believe how easy it is, because when you're doing it every day, you actually do get easier just leaving your own opinions at the door until someone asks you to write them down.
Thank you.
And Aoife, thanks for the question. And Aoife, I know you've stayed on a bit longer than you even could, so thanks so much. Such is the life of a journalist.
Yeah.
Thanks for all of your really inspiring and, you know, motivational bits there, and I think a lot for people to consider when they're submitting an application to the SMEDIAs. So thanks a million, Aoife.
No worries. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Aoife.
Cheers.
And we'll go back to Alana, who you'll have heard there a moment ago asking Aoife a question. Bye, Aoife, thanks. Alana Daly Mulligan, last year's recipient of the European Commission's SMEDIAs Award for Journalism relating to European affairs. Alana is a multi-award winning journalist, filmmaker and spoken word artivist. So I'll let them explain that word themselves. Her work revolves around growing up queer in Ireland and the people in their lives that helped shape it. So I could speak for ages about Alana. Again, you can see the full bio in the participant pack there. But Alana was current affairs editor for Motley magazine and was shortlisted for 5 SMEDIAs Award, nominated for 4, and of course won the European Commission one. So has lots of insights to share, I'm sure. Alana, I'll pass over to you to share your bits of wisdom with everybody here today.
Thanks a million, Lisa. So hello, everyone. I'm hoping this will be very chill and informal, and if people have questions, they can just pop in and say hello. So yeah, my name's Alana. I have just graduated from UCC, thank God, and I was the current affairs editor in Motley, as Lisa mentioned. And I'm just gonna, I suppose, talk you through a little bit about my experience applying for this award last year, and maybe just give you some tips, but also like create some space that if you have any questions or queries or want advice, I'm more than happy to give that. So I'm just gonna share some slides really quickly. Oh, they're great, thanks. So yeah, so very optimistically, I think you should always start off, if you want to apply for an award, think about winning it, think about what do you want to get out of it. So we'll go to the second slide really quickly. Yeah, so just a bit about me. Yeah, BA English and History, class 2021. I started out in radio. It just wasn't for me because, believe it or not, I actually don't really like talking that much. I much prefer writing. And then I became current affairs editor at Motley. So I kind of fell into that by accident. And I've always had an interest in politics, and especially in Europe. Like, I was very fortunate when I was a teenager to get to speak at Brussels and Strasbourg and, you know, do work with the EU Commission when I was a kid. So Europe has been very good to me, and it's always been something I've been really passionate about. And then on top of that, a lot of things I like to write about are like LGBTQ rights and women's rights, minority rights in general. And the style of pieces I enjoy to write, like, are interview explainer pieces, and then I enjoy poetry as well. So that's just about me. If we could pop on to the next slide. So yeah, just some quick things. So I know there's a mix of people here who are from either student media, you might be doing European studies, you might just have seen the advertisement for this award and said, you know, I really want to give this a crack. You really don't need to be an expert in European affairs to do this. And I think it was mentioned earlier, like, the topics are quite broad. You can really make them your own and do your own thing with them. I'd also say, like, you have time. I wrote my article in August before I submitted it in March. So I was really on the ball with it, but you could write it in February and then submit it. Like, you have time, but do be aware of your deadline. Do be aware of like what you want to tell, that like how you want to tell that story. I think, you know, Aoife said it earlier, write about something that gives you a buzz. Like, even if none of the topics excite you, find some angle in it that would, you know, keep you committed to read it for the 650 or like 1400 words, you know. I'd also say practice your style. So like, know what works for you, like what you're comfortable writing, what makes you feel like you're proud of it. Like, you want to put in a piece that makes you feel good about it and, you know, you're happy with it. And I'd also say plan your piece. Like, planning is the most important. So when I became current affairs editor last year, I had a roadmap for the entire section, because I'm a little bit OCD like that, and I planned out a number of pieces for the entire year, and I had a number of awards that I wanted our section to target. So this was one that I thought was really important, because, you know, European affairs are so important, especially at the moment. Like, it's never been a time, like, European issues have never been so important in this country, I think. So I really wanted to make sure that all of our section editors and all of like the writers in my section focused on this award. So just be aware of that and think about it like that. So if we can pop on to the next slide. Yeah, so my entry, I wrote about MEP Grace O'Sullivan. So I'm very fortunate to know Grace quite well. We're both from Waterford, and Grace had been very good to me. And I suppose the whole point of the piece was demystifying what an MEP does, making an MEP a human being, because I feel like when we see them up on the placards, it's very difficult to kind of, you know, sympathize and humanize with them. And especially, you know, as mentioned earlier, MEPs are in Europe doing European things, and they often don't engage with us in Ireland, or it's not very visible. So it was just about bringing Grace home, making what she was doing more visible, especially because she's an environmental activist as well. She does a lot for the LGBTQ community. And I think she's a fantastic person, and I wanted to write a piece that was both an homage to her work, but also to her as a human being, because she is wonderful, and, you know, she's very good to give young people opportunities. And I think that's really worth celebrating. A unique feature of the piece was there was also a video documentary as well, kind of done. It was about, I think it was 12 minutes long, and just talking about her climate activism, and it was with the interview with her. So I interviewed her for 3 hours. It was quite a long interview. It was a nightmare to transcribe, and I would recommend, if you're writing a piece, try and keep it like, plan your interviews how long you want it to go on for. Don't let it ramble on for 3 hours if you don't have to, and be very set in your questions. Another thing I kind of learned from it was you don't have to be an expert all the time in absolutely everything when you're going into it. They're there, especially if you're doing an interview piece, they're there to answer your questions, and they should be trying to enlighten you. That doesn't mean you go in completely blind, but I think letting them inform you and almost doing the reading afterwards and saying, oh, well, this is actually what they're saying in comparison to this, that can be useful. So yeah, that was the piece, and I was so thrilled to win the award. And, you know, Grace has been so supportive, and the European Commission have been fantastic to work with. So, like, you know, I can't emphasize it enough. It is a wonderful award to win, and, you know, there is that cash prize as well. That's quite nice as well. So just sweetens the deal. But yeah, we'll pop on to the next slide. And I know I'm flying through this, but I just want to give time for people's questions, because I can rabbit on about, you know, what my experience was, but really I want to be able to try and answer your questions if I can. So yeah, top tips: prepare your questions in advance. I would recommend writing everything down that you possibly could want to ask someone if you're doing an interview piece, and then cut back, and you'll find your focus with your questions fairly soon. Research is really important as well. So having a knowledge around the topic is always great. But as I said earlier, don't stress yourself too much about it. If you're getting an interviewer, like an interviewee, get them soon. Make sure you have a date, a time, all of that kind of stuff, and plan your interview out, how you want the interview to go, how you're going to respond to their questions. If you do enough research about the person you're talking to, I think it's always helpful to kind of know their ideas about things, so that if they say something, you can respond and ask a follow-up, that kind of a thing. I would also say get a transcriber if you're writing an interview. So there's an Otter app, and it's fantastic, and it just transcribes everything really well, and it's really great. And there's a student discount on it, and it's free for up to 40-minute interviews, but it's really good. And then edit it down and get someone you trust to give you a second opinion on it. So I don't know if that's all fairly standard stuff. And I think, you know, the question section is the next slide. So if anyone has any questions, I know I blasted through that. Feel free to ask away.
Thanks, Alana. I think it's that really basic stuff and things like there are transcription apps out there that are free. You know, that's the stuff that can be really helpful and practical for people. Any quick questions for Alana? We'll come back to proper bit of Q&A and discussion afterwards anyway, folks. So do have a think about any questions you might have. Oh, here's just one quick one and then we'll move on. Natalia asks, does your piece have to be published before submitting it to the SMEDIAs? No, I think it actually shouldn't be published. Would that be right to say, Kira Mahan, if she's still with us?
I think it is. I know my piece was published anyway. Yeah.
Hi, you're wondering if the piece should be published. Yes, it does need to be published, whether that's in your college newspaper or on a regional paper or, you know, national. And if you're having any issues, some colleges don't have, you know, the smaller colleges might not have a college newspaper. We run oxygen.ie and we can publish it there for you if you're having any difficulty. That to be a barrier for anyone to enter, but that's a student website, so that would be and it would just go up unedited as is, and you just have to email the editor at oxygen.ie and let them know that you're planning on entering into media so that there are no changes or anything, that it is as it is. But that's it, yeah.
So it can be published in a range of, you know,
yes.
or online, whatever. Great. And another further question there, and to be entered, do you enter yourself to be considered, or does it depend on the body that published it? I think they might mean like the student publication or whatever else, but no, it's an individual application, Kira, right? It's the person who's applying. So like Alana applied while working with Motley, so it's yeah, you applying yourself directly.
Yeah, just on that, we will open the entries on the 1st of March, and you'll have a couple of weeks. It's all on oxygen.ie. You'll click into enter. You click into the category, and then you put in your personal details, and you upload the entry. That's
yeah, and you'll see the full guidelines, folks, with all of the detail in your participant pack that we sent out to you. And then do keep an eye on the SMEDIAs guidelines, regulations themselves as well, the broader sort of awards regulations, just to be sure that you're not wasting your time or anything like that, that you've done everything you should do before applying. So great, keep thinking about questions and keep your questions ready, and we'll come back for a bit more discussion. But I'm delighted to say our next speaker has joined us. So I'll introduce Jude Webber, who is the Ireland correspondent of the Financial Times. And Jude, since taking up the role, has been covering lots of key issues for Ireland and Europe more broadly, including Brexit, our relationship with Northern Ireland, the global corporate tax deal, and many other issues. So Jude, I might welcome you to speak now. Thanks.
There we are. Thanks very much, Lisa. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak here. Well, I mean, for everybody else here, probably reporting on Europe or writing about Europe is probably sort of second nature. But just to give you a flavour, the last time I wrote stories about Europe before coming here in the middle of August was back in the early 2000s. I was living in Italy, and I was reporting on all of the fiscal hoops that Italy had to jump through to be able to qualify for the euro, and paying the taxes associated with that myself, I might add, and you know, on the launch of the euro and things like that. So for me, coming back to Europe has meant really it's almost like reporting on a whole other country. Obviously Europe's not a country, it's many countries, but a whole, you know, foreign thing for me. So the first thing I'd say is that and I think it's useful at any stage for people starting out, and for people you know, with even with more experiences, just to try and keep that sort of sense of novelty about about things, that this is a whole new thing, and you can kind of take a fresh perspective of it. Obviously, I'm joining this Brexit party well after the ship has sailed, and dealing with all the fallout and trying to get up to speed very quickly on all of the things. It's not always easy in journalist terms. One of the first stories I was asked to do after I got to this job was to update a story that somebody in London had written about the Human Rights Act and how that's what might happen if the UK decided to revise it or scrap it, or how that would affect Northern Ireland. And I committed the atrocious rookie error of thinking the Council of Europe was in fact part of the EU, and was then inundated by all sorts of messages from people saying, oops, no, it isn't. So while I'd say it's very useful, I think, to come to things fresh and to try and, even if, you know, it's a subject that you've been following for a long time, try and maintain that sort of distance and look at it as if it were a new subject. It's also good to check your facts, and I can speak from someone who didn't quite check them enough there. So for me, reporting on Europe, there's just like an awful lot of stuff to assimilate. First of all, quite complicated legal stuff, as everyone here knows, the protocol, for example. I think it's quite tricky in terms of understanding the nuances of things, you know, whether this is incremental or whether it's actually a very subtle signpost towards a new position or a new standpoint. So I think the only way to do that, and just picking up a little bit from what Alana was talking about there, which I only caught the second half of her presentation, but just, you know, she mentioned at one point bouncing ideas off people, or bouncing your story off, getting someone else to read it. I mean, I think contact building is absolutely crucial, because if you're trying to report on an area where you don't feel an expert, and other people perhaps think that you are more expert than you are, then it's very, very important, I would say, to ask the people who do know, and to keep on asking, and to ask the stupid questions, and not to be afraid of asking the stupid questions. You know, the number of times I've just written a story about, you know, is anybody winning this supposed win-win from the Northern Ireland Protocol? You know, is North-South trade is booming, but is East-West trade booming? And the people that you speak to are involved in very you know, they're manufacturers, or they're involved in trade or in industry in some respects, and they all understand the issues backwards and inside out, which isn't always the case when you're new into a subject, which is of course what attracts us to journalism in the first place. We like, you know, flying in, parachuting into a new subject and learning all about it, and then having to assimilate that into a readable or broadcastable format. So I'd say just, you know, ask the stupid questions, and don't be afraid of asking the stupid questions. And you know, and for me, as I said at the beginning, for me it's been very useful to sort of almost treat this as if it's a foreign country. Now, the extent to which that's possible when you actually live here, and if you've been following the European affairs and European events for a long time, it's more tricky perhaps, but to try and always keep that sense of perspective, you know, and that goes hand in hand with, you know, asking the stupid questions. I've come to Ireland having spent the last 21 years in Latin America. And before that I spent 5 years in Italy, as I said. That was at the time from 1995 to 2000. So that really was, you know, the getting ready for the Euro project, and seeing how that sort of bedded down. And it really does feel like moving to Mars, coming back here now, because everything is so different. I did sort of ask myself, you know, talking of stupid questions, I did find myself asking myself a stupid question when I got here, thinking, no, does the Irish Central Bank cut interest rates? And I had to remind myself that, well, actually, no, that's all done in Frankfurt now, isn't it, centrally? So so it's been quite a learning curve. I moved to Peru, where I spent 5 years reporting on all sorts of very, very different things. Latin American politics. I think Latin America feels almost like a TARDIS from Europe. You know, it's somewhere over there on the horizon, and when you get there, it opens up into this whole other world that perhaps Europe isn't really particularly aware of. So I spent a long time reporting on that, and there were some massive scandals that were going on at the time. Then I moved to Argentina, which was just trying to pick itself up after a really enormous crash and bank collapse, bigger than the Irish bank collapse. So, you know, sort of put it in perspective. And then I moved to Mexico, which I thought would be a kind of sort of country that was working, because it had just re-elected a government that had structural reforms on the agenda, and they were, you know, it seemed to be a country that wasn't going down but was going up. And I was a little bit concerned about how easily I would adapt to reporting on a country that was working and everything was going fine. And I sort of have the same feelings a little bit coming to Ireland. Everything seems to be, you know, very there's no crisis on the horizon, things are going very well. It didn't quite work out that way in Mexico. Things went a bit pear-shaped, so I'm not quite sure what that bodes, what that means for Ireland. But I mean, in a nutshell, that's sort of been my experience. Before moving to Italy in 95, I was a graduate trainee with Reuters. I joined a year or so after leaving university. I spent time working in the newsroom in London, and then was posted to Madrid, which was terrific training. And I would say to anybody looking at a career in journalism that you know, working for a news agency is an excellent training, because you learn to do things fast and accurately, and under pressure and multitasking. And I worked in London, Ireland briefly, Madrid, and Rome. And then for me, the pleasure of moving to a newspaper has been that you have more ability to get into subjects at longer form, which I think is really very satisfying. You can, you know, you have all of a sudden you have 1,000 words at your disposal, which perhaps you never do working for a news agency. So you know, so I've really enjoyed making the transition to a newspaper, and obviously these days it's not just no single, it's not the boundaries between print and broadcast have blurred a little bit. So almost everybody does some video or some podcasts as well at the same time. So I would say, you know, being able to be versatile and adaptable and lend your hand, have a go at these sorts of things would also be, you know, top tips. But I'd be, I'm not quite sure what the other speakers have covered, as I'm afraid I was out doing the day job this morning. So I'm very happy to take questions.
Thanks so much, Jude. I just got one question in here I'll put to, and then we'll move on and come back to a few questions afterwards. What is it like to be a woman in journalism, and how do we support marginalized voices in journalism? Would you have anything to kind of share on that?
I think things have changed. I do remember many years ago, I think I was when I was working in Madrid, having, you know, my interviewee stare at my chest the whole time, and I did feel that this was, you know, not ideal. Let's say. I think that's changed. I really do think that. I mean, there are more and more women, but and more women who are, you know, anchors on television and leading voices, columnists, and things like this. So I think you can still. There was a piece in the paper which I didn't get a chance to read in full this morning, but or on Twitter, I forget where I saw it, but it was talking about entrepreneurs and how venture capital companies tend to sort of talk down to women and say, you know, there's these lovely girls and they've got these lovely projects, and I think there can be an element of that. So you have to sort of double arm yourself by preparing very well, by being confident and being assertive and knowing what you're talking about, or at least giving the impression that you do. And in terms of diversity issues, I mean, the Financial Times, for example, has had a terrible track record, I think it's fair to say, on diversity. You know, we were very much a sort of a white, public school educated, male dominated outfit. And we now have a female editor who has put diversity right up there at the top. And it's, I think, still safe to say we're a long way from where we should be. But just by making it a priority has meant that we now have people of colour, we have people of different sexual orientations, different, I don't think we have any transgender journalists, but at least that's all of these things we've sort of thrown open to not only hiring people from more minorities, but also making it something that is talked about more. So we're sort of more aware of the problem, but I'd say there's an awful lot of a long way to go. But in terms of, in practical terms, how people can deal with that, I think it's not really letting those doubts in, you know, not behaving or acting or taking any shit from anybody who might try to treat you like you're not as good as any of the men. And I think, to be fair, I mean, I haven't had any, in the, you know, couple of months I've been here, I haven't had any, there's been no feeling that people would treat women here any differently. But the one thing I would say, though, is it's probably different if you're working for a tiny little newspaper, or if you have a big brand behind you that you're representing. It's easier to be taken more seriously if you're working for a more prestigious or more well-known newspaper. But I think the same, you know, goes, you know, the main point, as I made earlier, was just, you know, keep on, just prepare well, and don't let the doubts in.
Wonderful, Jude. Thanks so much. We have a few more questions coming in. I'm just going to pass on to our last speaker, Grace Bolton, who's going to speak to you for a few moments, folks. Then we'll take a quick coffee break, or break, whatever anyone needs, and then we'll have lots of great questions, discussion, and more tips for you if you're thinking of applying to this award. So I'll pass over to Grace, who, as I mentioned earlier, is spokesperson and head of press and media at the European Commission representation in Ireland. And Grace has over 8 years' experience as an EU civil servant with the Cabinet and the European Commissioner for Enlargement and Neighbourhood Policy, Secretariat General's International Policy Unit, and she's also worked for a few departments within the Irish government. So Grace, you're very welcome, and thanks so much for speaking today.
Thanks, Lisa. Just to carry on, one of the messages in Jude's presentation was never under-prepare and never be too shy to go back over the basics. So that's what my presentation is aiming to do, to just rapidly go back over those basics so that you can see which areas you might want to read more about yourself, or which areas you might want to look into a little bit more. And I'll close then with a little case study of how a fairly obscure and early discussion can be made very relevant to home. So I'll start by saying, if we were not in COVID times, you would all be sitting in one of the rooms in this building in the first picture, the European Commission Representation Office in Ireland, which is on Lower Mount Street. Under normal circumstances, we've got an information centre and lots of interesting booklets and material to be had in the reception. So if you find yourself in Dublin whenever life goes a little bit back to normal, please do call in and visit us. Next slide, please. So I'll start with the very basics. Who's in the European Union? We have 27 member states, 446 million people. There were successive waves of enlargement. So as you can see at the bottom there, it's very small, but you'll be getting the presentations afterwards. The initial group that set up the European Economic Community was in 1952 in blue. Then we moved on to the 1973 enlargement, the UK and Ireland. And as we know, there's only one of us left now, along with Denmark. Then we had the 1981 enlargement, 1986, 95, 2004, which was quite a seminal one for people my age, because that's when I went to university, and 10 other member states joined to the Central and Eastern Europe. And that was quite a symbolic move because it united Europe, West and East, after the Cold War. Then in 2007, we had Romania and Bulgaria, and 2013 was the accession of Croatia. So the EU project, if you like to call it, is one that's constantly in flux, constantly changing. At the moment, the EU is engaging with the countries of the Western Balkans. You can see them there, sort of, there's an island that aren't really any particular colour, where those countries are trying to improve the situation for their citizens, bring their different areas of governance up to the European acquis or the European standards, with a view to possibly becoming members in the future, but no dates are set at the moment. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the European Union, the most important thing to understand is that the EU is not a single entity. It's actually made up of a number of different institutions and bodies. So under the treaties, the institutions are laid out as the European Commission, the Council of the EU, and the European Parliament. Now, they're the three decision-making bodies, if you like. They form part of the decision-making triangle, where the European Commission proposes something, the Council discusses it at the member state level, and the Parliament then brings in a sort of a citizen oversight through the elected members of the European Parliament. Now, there are other institutions. You can see other boxes. So in the top right, with the European Council, which is the prime ministers, who meet normally twice a year, and they say, we would like the EU to take action on this, this, this. We need action on environment to reach our goals. So the Commission would go off and make suggestions how to concretely reach our environmental goals, and then try and implement them in discussion with the Council and the Parliament. Then underneath that little box, you've got the European Court of Justice, which is it's very prominently in the news at the minute because the UK, are not keen for the European Court of Justice to have any remit over questions that need to be settled through Brexit. But basically, whenever anybody can't agree on how EU law should be applied, it's the European Court of Justice that has the final say. And it's made up of judges from all the member states. Then we have two advisory bodies, which are the Economic and Social Committee and the Committee of the Regions. So they bring two fairly distinct perspectives on policies that are being discussed. So the Committee of the Regions aims to reinforce the principle of subsidiarity, which is that decisions should be taken as close as possible to the locality. So they bring a very local perspective, regional perspective. Then the Economic and Social Committee brings a more sort of employment focused perspective. So that would be more of a stakeholder body providing advice. And then there are a couple of other bodies I should mention: the European Ombudsman to receive complaints, European Court of Auditors to make sure that money is being spent correctly, that there's no fraud. The European Investment Bank and the European Central Bank then are very important for providing funds for larger projects, and the European Central Bank is key for monetary policy. Next slide, please. So just to break down a little bit more in a bit more detail how decisions are taken, because this is important, because if you want to write an article about a particular policy that's being prepared, it's really important to understand where in the process is this. So if you think of this as a giant sausage machine, what policy are you looking at? Where is it in the sausage machine? Because that affects who you talk to, what kind of questions you ask. So to just break that down a little bit, there's top-down processes and bottom-up processes. So if I give you an example of a top-down process, that would be COP26, the climate change conference is in the media at the moment. So let's talk about environment. So the European Council of all the prime ministers and heads of state come together in Brussels and say, we have a huge problem with the environment. We actually need to reduce our net emissions, and we need to make sure that we don't cross this threshold of reaching three degrees since pre-industrial levels. So we urgently need to take action to reduce to bring our emissions to net zero levels. How can we do that? So the European Commission will then identify a number of areas that action could be taken on at EU level to bring those emissions to net zero levels. So the Commission has 28 commissioners from each member state, but the commissioners are actually there to look at the EU interest. So the commissioners will all be looking at, different perspectives. So you might have a commissioner for energy policy, a commissioner for environmental policy, a commissioner for agriculture, and they will all look at how these different proposals would affect their own sectoral areas across the EU. The Commission will then issue normally a recommendation to the Council and the Parliament on the areas where action could be taken. So that proposal will be sent to the Parliament and to the Council. the council, being the member state diplomats, will discuss it. And if you think about it, a particular proposal to reduce the emissions of vehicles might sound like an uncontroversial thing, but if you're Germany and an awful lot of your industrial employment comes from manufacturing cars, you're going to have a slightly different view on the sequencing and the emphasis given to particular proposals. So that's where the politics come in. So the Commission looks at across the board, what can we do to reduce emissions? Then the member states will have their own preferences. For example, one of the stereotypical presentations about Ireland is that we are very fond of our agricultural industry and we don't want to sell our farmers down the stream by making them cull all of their cattle. So this is where that starts to play out. And the European Parliament will also have this, but not at the member state level. It'll be interest groups will be lobbying MEPs. MEPs are coming from different political groups. So they'll be bringing that approach to how they discuss these. Then those proposals will be discussed in a sort of a triangular format between the Council, the Parliament and the Commission to identify the compromises that need to be made to form an agreed position that will then be implemented. So that's sort of a top-down approach. Now there's also the opportunity to have more bottom-up laws. So there you can have citizens and interest groups make petitions to the Commission to make a proposal on something. So it's called a citizens' initiative. And if you look at there's a repository of citizens' initiatives about all sorts of wild and wonderful topics. And if you get a certain number of signatures across a certain number of member states, the Commission is obliged to investigate whether it can make a proposal on that area. So that's actually quite an interesting thing to look at. You might find a topic that whets your interest in there. Next slide, please. So when I mentioned the European Council, I just wanted to illustrate it a little bit. So this is the European Council from about a year ago or 2 years ago. It's all we call it the heads of state and government. So in Ireland's case, it's the Taoiseach. Germany would send its Chancellor, who for a long time was Chancellor Merkel. France sends its president. So obviously it depends on the country's makeup who's there. So that's why we call it the heads of state and government. So each country would send a different, an appropriate representative. So next slide, please. And just to illustrate again, so you see a lot of logos and symbols and things all around the place, but just to emphasize, to go back to this decision-making triangle. So the European Commission is the top logo and the Commission proposes legislation. At the bottom right, you've got the Council of the European Union and the member state diplomats who discuss it. And then bottom left, you've got the European Parliament and the elected MEPs who discuss it. And then that legislation or law is adopted by co-decision between the three institutions. So next slide, please. When I mentioned the European commissioners, it seems apt to show you the map of the 28 commissioners. The Commissioner of Irish nationality is flagged down there in red, Mairead McGuinness, who's Commissioner for Financial Services and Capital Markets Union. One thing to point out is that commissioners are not there as the Irish commissioner or the German commissioner. They're actually there as European citizens of Irish nationality or of German nationality. And they don't even say, in my country, we do this, in my country, we think this. They say, in the country I know best. But they're not there representing their member state. They're there obviously informed by where they've come from and carrying that knowledge and experience with them. But that is, they have to look at the general EU common interest rather than the interest of the country they come from. And you can see there are dark green commissioners up there. At the very top, we've got President von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission until 2024. And the darker green commissioners are vice presidents of the European Commission. So they would have more coordination and oversight over different policies. Next slide, please. Just to illustrate it all a little bit, I think Aoife mentioned to you the press room of the European Commission. So the European Commission press room, you can see it there in the bottom left. It is indeed a really big room. In the top left, you've got the Berlaymont, which is the headquarters of the European Commission. And you probably see it in some news reports because the journalists tend to stand outside either against the backdrop of the flags or top right, or against the backdrop of the entrance, bottom right. And give their summary of the controversial issue or policy of the day. The European Commission is quite unique insofar it is one of the only institutions in the world that does give a media briefing every single day, where journalists are free to ask any question on any topic they like. The other one that does spring to mind is the US President, the White House. They have a briefing every day. But otherwise, the European Commission prides itself on being very open and very approachable for journalists. Journalists that are interested in being based in Brussels are normally assigned by their organisation and accredited to the European Commission. And once they're accredited to the Commission, they have the right to go in and out of the building pretty much any time. They're free to attend the midday briefing, to ask questions, to attend special technical briefings off the record, on the record. Everything becomes open to them at that point when they're accredited. Next slide, please. Then to illustrate again, we talk about the Council of the European Union. So inside this building on the bottom right, you actually have two things. You've got the European Council, which is the institution attended by the heads of state and government twice a year. They have their meetings in there. There's actually kind of a new building to the right of it that looks like a barrel, but basically that's symbolically the council building. And then there's also the Council of the European Union. I'm not wanting to bore you guys to death, but there are 10 different formations. You can read the names of them down there, where the different member state diplomats discuss different files. So, for example, foreign affairs would be discussed in the Foreign Affairs Council, which is attended by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Topical for the moment would be, let's see, the environment. So number 9 down there. So there's an Environment Council that would be attended by all the ministers for the environment from across the EU, from every member state. And to prepare that council, you'll have member state diplomats meeting sort of in committee, maybe twice, 3 times a week, to discuss the different policies that then when their bosses come to Brussels, maybe once every 2 months or once a month for the big Environment Council, that most of the policies are already pre-discussed and the ministers are only discussing the most difficult issues that the diplomats couldn't agree on. So next slide, please. And then I mentioned the European Parliament. So the European Parliament is made up of MEPs that are directly elected by the citizens. And our last election was in May 2019. So since you'll be getting these slides, I'm not going to name check anybody at all, but you can see in the right-hand side, you can see Ireland's 3 constituencies and the MEPs that have been elected to represent the citizens of Ireland in those constituencies. I'll go to the next page. But what I would point out about the Parliament is that they have EU-level political parties. So if you think about it, you know, the main political parties in Ireland, we're all familiar with it, you know, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Labour, Sinn Féin, etc. When they go to the European Parliament, they obviously have their background and their relationships in their home country, but they've actually normally signed up also to a European level political party. So all the European political parties have their own identity. But then at the EU level, they find families of common interest. So I suppose the easiest one to explain is the European People's Party, which is the centre-right political party. And it's an interesting orientation because once you understand the European political parties, you can actually situate other countries' politics in relation to the European level. So the centre-right party is the European People's Party. That's the party that Fine Gael is affiliated with, but it's also the party where you would find centre-right parties from all over Europe. So that's where Angela Merkel's CDU is represented, for example. So when you're trying to find the orientation around a particular topic, it is useful to look up, well, which EU level party is this affiliated with? So all across Europe, Labour is known as the social S&D party, Socialists and Democrats. So if you're looking for a Labour perspective on something, you can look up, well, what's the name of the Labour Party in Bulgaria? Well, you look up the S&D party. What's the Bulgarian party affiliated with the S&D? That's what it's called. There we go. So that's the party I'm going to look into. So this does change over time. So the UK Conservatives broke away from the centre-right EPP and created the ECR group, which is the European Conservatives and Reformists group, which was a bit more right-wing of the centre-right group. And obviously it continues to exist now, even though the Conservatives have left, and it's quite heavily populated by the far right, the sort of more right-wing groups from countries like Poland and Hungary. So just to point out to you that this is something to look into. If you're looking into the European Parliament, do look at the different political groups, because they are quite an important reference point for the political compass on a particular topic. So I'd like to go to the next slide, please. So now that was quite a lot of theory. So I would like to give you a very practical example of how this would work in practice. The most important thing is to try and get an interesting angle, and to try and figure out, to make this more relatable, look at the different positions that have been taken. So who's going to win, who's going to lose, what's going to happen next. So the example I'd like to take, it's kind of topical given that it happened last night, is time change. So back in 2018, there was a campaign by citizens and MEPs to completely abolish this practice of annual time change. So they said, you know, people in general find it quite annoying because children take a while to adjust to it and people don't know what time they're on, etc., etc. So MEPs and citizens had multiple campaigns over a number of years to abolish this. So you wouldn't really believe this, but it's actually managed at EU level, because the European single market needs to operate on the same time. And if all the different member states are going to change the time that they're operating on, it needs at least to be at the same time every year, and all the member states need to make it clear which time zone they're going to belong to. Otherwise, you have pure chaos. So since I think it's the 80s, there's a European directive laying down what month of the year or what weekend of the year the time change will happen, so that at least all the member states change time at the same time, if you know what I mean. So it would be for the European Commission to change that, and for that to be changed at EU level if the change is going to happen. So the European Commission heard all of these, you know, petitions and requests and said, okay, no problem. We don't have a preference whether we have biannual time change or not, but we just need to put everyone on the same page. So the European Commission held an online consultation to establish, did people actually want this to be abolished? And the overwhelming response was, yes, we want it to be abolished. So the Commission did a bit of research and made a proposal to end biannual time change. So the Commission's communication to the Parliament and to the Council was, we've researched all of this, time change can be useful for this, this and this, but the overwhelming majority of people consulted do not want it to be maintained. Therefore, we're encouraging member states to decide by April 2019 whether they wish to end biannual time change, and if they do want to end it, do they want to stay on permanent summertime or permanent wintertime? Because if all the member states have to decide the same way, and if a number of states decide to have permanent summertime and a number of states may decide to have permanent wintertime, that's fine, but we just need to know so that everybody can understand what everybody else is doing. So this seemed quite logical, except for the fact that Brexit negotiations were ongoing, and Paddy Smith was the Irish Times correspondent in Brussels at that period, and he immediately sort of triangulated from the Commission saying, okay, everybody could do, we've no problem, the member states can decide to do what they want. But he, being an Irish journalist in Brussels, he said, hang on a minute, if Ireland decides to do one thing and the UK decides to do another thing, and then the UK is not even bound by this after Brexit, we could absolutely end up in a situation where the time zone in the 26 counties would be different from the time zone in the other 6 counties. So he immediately localised the issue and said in his headline, clocks in Dublin and Belfast could be on different times after Brexit. And that was a cracker of an article, because everyone looked at it and said, what? No, we can't have that. So it made for a very good read if you want to look it up. But he immediately triangulated and made this kind of theoretical discussion about, okay, people want to get rid of time change. Will we have permanent summertime? Will we have permanent wintertime? And he made it relevant. He made it extremely relevant for anyone who lives in Ireland. So, and he had that, you know, it's that kind of way of seeing around the corner, of seeing the implications of a proposal that makes for really good articles. Looking at complications. It's, you know, not to say that nobody in the Commission anticipated this might be a problem, but, you know, they can't anticipate every local issue, where it's for the journalists to highlight this sort of thing. So even before the Irish politicians really would have given it too much thought, it would be flagged in their minds that this is an issue. The journalists are writing about this, that we might have a scenario where the 26 counties could be end up on a different time zone in a different time to the 6 counties. So just want to highlight that as a an example of something that you might like to look up to see how to make these things more relevant. I'll go for the next slide, please. So for more inspiration, now I realize, we say write a topic about your EU affairs and you think, what about EU affairs? Oh, Brexit. And we have the list of topics that are in your participant pack. But, bearing in mind the list of topics, it can be useful to sit with a list of topics and then also explore the press service of the different institutions to get ideas about what kind of policies are being communicated about and what kind of policies are in the pipeline. So I would encourage you to look up the press service of the different institutions. So the European Commission has the spokesperson service, the Council also has a press office, and the European Parliament has a press service, and they would issue I would say like multiple press releases a day, sort of, anything between 5 to 10 a day on different topics that the different organizations are working on. Now, the Commission's press releases can be a bit tricky because normally it's the Commission is proposing, basically, as you now know, to the Council and the Parliament to scrap time change. And we'll have quotes from the different commissioners sharing their view about whether or not we should scrap time change. But we're not actually doing it yet. So by the time you will get a decision, it'll be the Council, all ministers have agreed to scrap time change. Or then the Parliament say the MEPs have taken a vote to scrap time change. Now, spoiler alert, we didn't scrap time change. Basically, the member states couldn't agree on it. So it's just kind of sitting on ice. Nothing has been done, nothing has changed. But if you kind of, for a little exercise for yourselves, go back and look at the different documents and different press releases from the different institutions on that issue, and you'll see the interplay between the three of them. I would recommend subscribing to different news sources to get inspiration. So you might like to look at the newsletter of the Commission representation in Ireland. It'll all be in your participant pack. EMI do a really good newsletter. We also have a radio station, EC Radio Ireland. Politico was very, very well established in Washington, and they set up in Brussels about 6 years ago. They write very, very insightful articles about these sort of gossip, about these policy proposals, but they also write very, very readable, gossipy articles about the relationship between different people and the relationship between different institutions. And they do a great deal of work to shine light on relationships, which is very interesting to read. EU Observer is a little bit more, sort of high level and not kind of digging in the dirt to find interesting things. I would recommend looking up the EU news correspondents in the mainstream papers. So Naomi O'Leary is the current correspondent in Brussels for the Irish Times, and everyone will be familiar with Tony Connolly, the RTE's Brussels correspondent. And then I'll just go to the next slide, please. So finally, just as a rapid reminder, these are the topics that are available for the SMEDIA competition. So the EU's response to the coronavirus pandemic. Just to give you a few hints on this one element is the vaccine procurement. Another element is rebuilding the economy after the transition back to normality. The Green Deal to protect the environment and climate. This one is very much present in our minds at the moment as COP26 is ongoing in Glasgow. The EU has a very clear Green Deal with many, many different elements to try and bring our emissions to net zero by 2030, which is very soon if you think about it. It's only 9 years away. So that's a topic that should bring lots of inspiration. Then protecting European democracy. There were some great articles written in recent years about media freedom in the different member states, attacks on journalists, which have sadly been on the rise. Europe in the digital age. If we all think about the pandemic, that's been quite a revolution in how we're using technology to work and learn in recent years. Rural development, agriculture and the CAP, that is always a major issue. And it's also one that has been affected by Brexit. So that might be, particularly if you think of fisheries, then agriculture now is also affected by the need to reduce our emissions. So there's, they're all interlinked, and you're welcome to find those interlinkages and explore them. Europe's role in the world, trade, development, migration, diplomacy. This is sort of the more foreign affairs-y one, if anyone's interested in that. Then finally, we have left in the future of Europe after Brexit, because Brexit the repercussions of Brexit are still rumbling on. Anytime there's a member state that disagrees with the Commission, we have some new form of exit, poll-exit, etc. So it's not necessarily going to leave, end up in a member state leaving, but it's just it's left a certain legacy. And then just to highlight to everybody, 2022 is going to be the European Year of the Youth. So there are a number of elements you might want to explore when it comes to that. There has been a program called Discover EU, where young students can apply for tickets to Interrail around Europe at the cost of the Commission. There are other elements you can look at in relation to that, so I'll leave it to your imaginations. But that's all for me for now, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Otherwise, I'll hand over to Lisa and we can go for lunch.
Thanks, Grace. We're actually coming up towards the end of the workshop, so I'll just say quickly, if anyone wants to grab a quick cup of tea or pop out for a bathroom break or anything, please do. But for anyone who'd like to just stay on, I'll go to one or two questions, and I can see a few coming in. Jude, I see you have a point there. If you want to jump in, please do, or I can read out.
Sorry, I was just trying to find the unmute button. No, I just wanted to add to the excellent points just made there in that presentation. I'd say that as well as following people on social media and reading the newspapers and things like that, I think podcasts are a phenomenal way of, instead of, you might feel a bit all at sea trying to work out what's relevant, what's not relevant by all of these sort of things, but they're sort of pre-digested by the experts. Tony Connolly's one is excellent, for example, and you can listen to them and absorb the information while doing something else. So I'm a big podcast fan while I'm on my bike cycling around, for example. And I would also just say when Grace mentioned the list of topics, I would always stress the need to try and make things personal, like find somebody who has been affected by whatever it was or is going to be affected, or like in the time change thing, for example, find a cross-border business for whom having two different time zones would be completely unworkable. I mean, something like that, just because I think people can relate to the stories much more, and it's just much more interesting to read about people than about sort of abstract topics. And in finding those people, networking, obviously, and talking to people and asking people and not being afraid to say, do you know anybody who, for example, or social media can be your friend. You can just chuck out something on social media and say, does anybody, I wrote a tourism story once early in COVID from Mexico, and I just sort of threw out on social media, has anybody been to Cancun lately? And I got inundated by replies and got some really good ones. So that was just my tuppence halfpenny, how do you say that? little addition to that excellent presentation.
Great, Jude, thanks so much. And shameless plug, we have a European Movement Ireland podcast, and we would have shared that link with you in the participant pack. And there are a number of others, as you said, Jude, and it is a great way. And as you say, as you're moving around, maybe when you're not sitting down to study, it's something that you can be carrying on listening to. And if anyone would like any more recommendations, we can give you lots of others from institutions and other organizations like ourselves. Lots of great podcasts out there and from journalists. Just a quick question, Jude, I might put to you if that's all right, and it's specific to